So the topic about controllers. Controllers are for doing read data coming from UI. Controller responsibilities. It need to read data which is coming from UI. Then that same data send same data to the model part. Get response from model. Send output to the user. Finally, controller responsibility, it need to read data and it need to send to model part. Model response it need to take, then the same response it need to send to UI. So controller here, it will become a mediator between UI and model. It's a mediator between controller and it's a mediator between model. So here to write controller operations in struts, there are 5 classes to write these controller operations. To write read operations, to send data to model, to get response from model, to send output to the UI, we have 5 controller classes here. What are those? We have one controller class. Controller classes are, one is action class and one is dispatch action class, and we have one lookup dispatch action class, and we have one event dispatch action, and we have one finally mapping dispatch action. To handle controller operations, we have these many action classes. So which action class we need to use in which use case? If it is an action class, when that action class we have to use under this controller part, if your view, if it have only one single submit button, if it have only one single submit button, in your view if you have only one single submit button, in that case you can go through action class. Here under controller part you can go through action class, and action class can provide internationalization support. It can provide I18N support. Let's say if you have multiple submit buttons also, you can handle from here, but manually we should write some internal conditions here. Okay, so generally it is useful for single submit button operations. In struts it is useful for single submit button operations. Along with internationalization support you can achieve it. Let's say if your form, if it is in English, submit English value if you have, or else if you have any Telugu submit values, submit, or if you have Hindi submit values or French submit values, if you have French submit, if you have any other language values here, you can handle any language values from your controller part. You can handle any language submit buttons from your controller part. It can handle only one single submit button operations if it is an action class. But if you go through dispatch action class, you can handle multiple button operations. The use case for dispatch action class is, let's say if you have multiple submit buttons in your UI, if you have multiple submit buttons here like save submit button, update, delete, find. If you have such type of multiple submit buttons in your form, to handle multiple submit button operations, they given dispatch action class. Dispatch action class can handle multiple submit button operations from one single class itself. But in case of dispatch action class, it is not possible to achieve internationalization. The reason is the same submit button value here we have to use as a method. Here this controller class methods we should maintain by using submit button values. Save, delete, update, find. Same button values we have to use as a methods here. Let's say if I apply internationalization for my form, these values will change into our native languages. If I apply Telugu internationalization here, my form data if it convert into Telugu language, save in Telugu language, update, delete, find. If it convert into Telugu language here, in case of Telugu language, if you try to hit your controller, in this controller if it not find any Telugu language methods, then there is a chance to get exceptions. So internationalization support we don't have in dispatch action class. Compulsory button value methods we should maintain here. If it is a dispatch action class, button value should equal to your method name. Button value should equal to method name. In case of internationalization, Telugu language or Hindi language values we can't able to write for your methods. So it is not possible to handle internationalization in case of dispatch action class. But if I go through lookup dispatch action class, it is not mandatory to maintain button value methods here. First thing, it is not mandatory to maintain button value methods here. You don't need to maintain any button value methods. You can write your required custom methods here. Like you can write employee save, employee update, employee delete, employee find. Like this you can write any number of methods in your controller class, and that controller class can provide support to any number of languages. If you submit request from English or if you submit request from Telugu language, for any language you can execute these methods. How we can map? By using submit button keys, you need to map to methods. Instead of using submit button values, if you go through lookup dispatch action class, here you need to map your button keys to method names. Your submit button keys you have to map to method names instead of mapping submit button values. Submit button values may change in case of internationalization, but submit button keys will remaining same in case of internationalization. That's why in lookup dispatch action class, instead of depending on button values, they are depending on submit button keys. By using that keys we need to map to methods. So in case of lookup dispatch action class, you can achieve internationalization. So for these use cases you can go through lookup dispatch action class. And when we have to go through this event dispatch action class, if it is a lookup dispatch action class is a abstract class. So that internally you have to override must a abstract method and you have to implement it. But if you go through event dispatch action class, it is a concrete implemented class, means fully implemented class. In case if you go through this event dispatch action class here, there is no, we don't require to implement any dispatch action. In case of event dispatch action class, we don't require to implement any abstract methods. If you go through event dispatch action, your submit button IDs you can map to methods here. Instead of using submit button keys or instead of using submit button values, you can use submit button IDs to map to your methods. Actually here you can handle multiple submit button operations using submit button value, using submit button keys, using submit button IDs also. Okay, so by mapping using submit button IDs, you can map to your methods. Button IDs you can map to your methods in case if you go through event dispatch action. And this button IDs method name mapping we can do through struts XML file itself. In struts XML file itself you can configure your IDs to method names. It is possible in case of event dispatch action class. In case of event dispatch action class, you need to map to your methods by using submit button IDs. Your submit button ID must need to equal to method name. In case of dispatch action, submit button value should equal to method name. In case of event dispatch action class, your submit button ID should equal to method name. Okay, then when I should go through this mapping dispatch action class, if you want to handle multiple form operations from one single controller, let's say if you have one form here, if you have multiple UI forms with same set of operations, multiple UI pages if you have here. Let's say if you have one form, employee ID, employee name, employee email. If you want to do save operation from here, and if you have one more form, employee ID, employee name, employee email. From here if you want to do update operation. These two same set of operations if you want to handle from one single controller. Here save operation and update operations along with internationalization. If you want to handle, then you should go through mapping dispatch action class. In case of mapping dispatch action class, you can map multiple forms to one single controller, but from each form we can handle only one single submit button operations. Multiple forms you can map to one controller, but from each form we can handle only one single submit button. So if you go through mapping dispatch action, you can map multi-forms to multiple forms. We can map to one single controller, one controller. Multiple forms we can map to one single controller. If you go through mapping dispatch action class, there you have to follow some some action names we need to map to our methods. Let's say if your form action, if it is save, this save action we need to map to save method. Let's say if it is update, update action you need to map to update. So here actual mapping you need to do action, you should map to methods. Actions we should map to methods in case of mapping dispatch action class. Already we know about action class, how to implement action class we know, right? So in case if you want to handle your controller operations using action class can provide support to how many submit buttons? Generally it will provide support for only one submit button. So single submit button operations, if you have in your requirement, if you have any single submit button operations, you can handle that operations by using action class. Simple example, employee registration. If you have an employee registration form, with ID, name, email, salary, along with internationalization support. If you are providing IITN support here, Telugu, English, Hindi. If you are providing internationalization support here, along with this IITN, if you want to handle this single submit button operations. Let's say if this form if you design by using struts tags, compulsory we have to write a bean class here. We have to write one bean class. Public class, something registration form. You need to extend this form from action form. In this class you need to write all private properties, private string, name, email, and private int ID, private float or double salary. Then write here setters and getters. Along with this we can write validate also here. Validations also we can write here. Okay. Then after completion of this form bean validations, the next step, whenever I submit this form, the data it need to store into bean class first. Whenever we submit our UI data, the data it need to store into bean. After storing it to bean, the same data it need to go to controller. So you can write your controller classes by extending from action class. Registration, controller, extend it from action class. In this action class you need to override a method, public action forward, execute method. Execute method input parameters are action mapping, action form, HTTP servlet request, comma HTTP servlet response. Finally it will throws, if any method if it throws exception, in that method we no need to handle compile time exceptions, we no need to write any try catches. So controller responsibility is what? Here we need to read data which is coming from UI. The data we can read by using request object, we can read data by using bean also, you can read data. You can read data by using your request object or else by using your bean object also you can read data. Controller responsibility, first it need to read data. So that read operations you can do by using request dot get parameter mechanism or else by using your bean object also you can read here. So using request object if you want to read data, you can read here int id integer dot parse int of request dot get parameter of id, then the remaining parameter string name request dot get parameter of name, string email request dot get parameter of email, then next float salary, float dot parse float request dot get parameter of salary. Like this we need to read data. After reading this data we need to send the data to model part. Let's say if you have one DAO class, you need to send this same data to DAO class. Let's say if you have one DAO class here. If you have one DAO will do database operations. In this DAO, if you have a save method here, public class, something DAO, employee DAO. In this DAO class, if you have save method, public int save with inputs. From here we can store data into our table. So finally controller what it need to do? It need to make a call to DAO save method. Then this DAO save method will give response here. It will give response. Here you need to create your DAO object, employee DAO, new employee DAO. Then call DAO dot save method. Pass your ID, name, email, salary. Finally it will return as one integer value. Based on that integer value, finally you need to return mapping dot find forward of success or failure. You need to return from here. So where exactly we have to provide mapping between this form and bean and controller and DAOs? Actually DAO controller mapping we no need to provide. Why? Because direct instantiation doing here. But you have to provide mapping between form to bean to controllers. From where you need to provide? In struts XML file, in struts config.xml file, you have to provide mappings. First one thing we should do, in between struts-config, struts-config. First thing, action mappings. Action mappings. In between action mappings and action mappings, action. Our form action path is, let's say if the form path is /reg, then the data need to store into reference name, bean reference name, registration form rf. Then this reference we should create here using form beans. In between form beans and form beans, form bean reference name rf and our class name registration form. Just you have to create this bean class reference. This bean class reference we are creating here. Then this is the actual reference ID. That reference ID we are configuring here. Whenever I submit data from here, the data we are trying to storing into this bean. Then after that, this data you need to send to controller. So then after this reference name rf, you need to configure here type equal to your controller name. The controller name is registration controller. Registration controller. Finally registration controller will send data to DAO. DAO will give us one response. After response we are trying to forwarding a forward name success. So then that forwards here we should configure. In between action and action there is one forward name equal to success and the path of success. If you have any success.jsp, that JSP path you should pass here. That's it. Okay. And if you require to populate validation errors after completion of validations, here you should configure one more attribute, input index.jsp. Let's say if your page name is index.jsp, then in that index.jsp page if you want to populate error messages using attribute input, you can configure your validation errors page. Okay. So here in this action class, the action class responsibility, read data, send data to model, get response, finally send output. Handling here, right? Instead of doing read operations by using request object, we can do read operations using form bean object also. How to read using form bean? Using this second reference AF, You just typecast your data into registration form. Then by using this ref reference, read your data int id equal to ref dot get id, string name rf dot get name, string email dot get email, finally float salary equal to rf dot get salary. By using your bean reference id also you can read data which is coming from form. The form data first it will store into bean, right? The same bean object it will serve here in the form of action form reference. So from that action form reference you just typecast it into your required type, then you can get your bean data here. After getting your bean data, send it to model, get response, finally send output to the user. Yeah, just I'll go through this example using simple action class, simple registration, single submit button operations.